So my name is Heather. Most people call me Weasel. My talk is called Must Use Correct Snek. And we're going to take a look at Python on Debian and Debian derivatives. So who and all's been here? If you haven't been here, it's because you've pretty much only ever used Windows or Mac. But yeah, this is a very common problem. And part of the reason I felt motivated to give a talk on this is that, yes, we all know that Linux systems use Python. And Python on our Linux system has to, support my development project, but also support my operating system. But then again, we're also developers, and we don't like things that seem arbitrary. And when people say, "Oh, do it this way," so understand more why people made these decisions to do things this way, it's a little easier to accept. Also, Debian derivatives are a good chunk of Linux systems. I mean, who's ever heard of a project called Ubuntu? So I would be remiss if I didn't point out that there are two ways to solve this problem. And everything you need to solve it are in one of these two documents. So the first document is the Debian Python policy, which covers what packages are available for Debian and what's in them. And if you don't like that solution, the second one is the official Python build instructions that covers all the dependencies that you need to be able to build Python from source. And instructions for all of the optional switches you can add to the build commands and so forth. I'm going to start with the Debian way of solving this. So part of that, we don't have pip, but there was also the problem of, hey, this package isn't available. Well, as of Debian 11, they dropped all of the unversioned Python packages. So going forward, any package that's in Debian is going to have a version number attached to it. The reasoning for this was way back when there was user bin Python and life was good, but then there was a backwards incompatible release of Python called Python 3.0, and the OS needed to use both, but it needed some way to disambiguate which one you were talking about because they weren't interchangeable. So enter user bin Python 3. Well, also, as of Debian 11, Python 2.7 went away. So there's no more user bin Python. If you want to put it there, you can use Python as Python 3 to put it back, but it's going to point at Python 3. You can still install Python 2 if you really feel motivated to do that on Debian 11, but as of Debian 12, it's gone. So if we dig further into the Python policy, any package Python x.y is a complete binary for deploying an application on Debian. Now, the significant part of that sentence is deploying, because Python x.y does not contain venv, dev headers, pip, any of the build tools, most of the things that you need as a developer to make Python work. There's a separate package called Python x.y full that includes the whole standard lib, idle, pydocs. It still doesn't include pip. You have to install that separately. And if you want this package, you're going to have to manually install it because it's not allowed to be a build dependency or a dependency for anything that's packaged for Debian. And in reality, isn't this why we all started installing from source in the first place? I mean, this is frustrating. Don't get me wrong. But the reasoning behind it is that Debian's goal is that they need to be able to do security updates. And app doesn't know about and can't update packages that were installed by pip. And in fact, system Python is marked as externally managed as of PEP 68. So pip will raise an exception if you try to install to one of these. Ultimately, pip is a package manager, and so is apt, but they have competing goals. One of them has to win. So in terms of they just said no pip. They do have official recommendations for developers. You can apt install the packages that you need to make Python work, and then use virtual environments to manage your dependencies with pip. Currently, there's a recommendation for a package called pipx. I had never heard of it until I started doing research for this talk, but it seems, I guess the project is designed to allow you to deploy an application in its own virtual environment. However, what I found with the docs, this seems to be more oriented towards deploying programs rather than building them. But you don't have to take my word for it. This is it's a PyPA project. Anyway. The other official recommendation is to use alt install when you build your Python from source. And this is going to be one of my first demos. Essentially, it does the exact same thing as building from source, but it does not link this binary to the user bin Python 3 alias. So essentially, your system doesn't know it's there. So with that, let's do some demos. All right, so this. Apple. Sorry, what OS am I talking about again?
Is there a Debian Plus? Plus. Windows Plus. Yay!
All right, so if I can figure out how mics work here. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So let's take a look at well, this could take a while. So in user bin, the only Python executable I have is Python 3.11. Now let's take a look at user local bin. As you can see, I've installed a few versions of Python. So the significant thing is Python 3.12 I installed by doing sudo make install, and Python 3.13 I installed doing sudo make alt install. So if we look at this, I get Python 12 in the shell. I have to do specific version to start a REPL with Python 3.13. And of course, there's no user bin Python alias in this system. So this is a fresh install of Debian 12. It wasn't upgraded from a previous version. So because I didn't create that alias, I don't have it.
If you do which Python 3 will work?
So it's running which Python points to user local bin Python 3 because that's the location of the Python executable that the alias is currently linked to. In this case, 3.12. So my next example, I'm not going to run on my machine because it's kind of destructive. But let's look at what happens when we play with the externally managed marker. So if you run sudo pip install, what have you, an externally managed environment should raise an exception. Now, there's two ways to turn this off. You can either do the break system packages flag, or you can remove the file at userlib Python version name externally managed. And according to Stefano, who was nice enough to review my slides, it's one of somebody with the Debian project. He said if you break your system doing this, you do get to keep both pieces. So I would say that if we look at the docs, the functionality that is here, or as far as the manipulating the externally managed marker, this is specifically something that it is suggested you might want to use it if you're packaging a container or some other specific environment. This is not something you want to do because, oh, it annoys me that it raises an exception when I try to use pip at the system level. But that said, let's take a look at what happens if we mess with this. Notice you have to say Python 3 pip. There's no Python pip.
Why is it 311?
I'm sorry?
Why is it 311?
311 is the current system Python for Debian. .312 is, I think it's still in testing. And it helps if I remember which package manager I'm playing with. So this is our externally managed environment exception. And we'll get an exception that gives us instructions on how to install this package safely. Um, specifically, this one is specific to Raspberry Pi because that's the computer I'm currently working on. But this exception is, it displays is the text of this file. Now, something to note. This is the Debian externally managed marker. And they are explicitly recommending that you use pipx to manage environments. Raspberry Pi changed that recommendation. And of course included their own documentation link. So let's delete this file and see what happens. So I get a warning that I shouldn't use pip as root now.
This meeting is being recorded.
That's good to know. So yeah, cases where this could be reasonable would be if you're building an image, say, for a container, because who likes getting weird exceptions when you're trying to build a Docker image? Obviously, as stated previously, this is a really bad idea to do on your own system. Yeah, we can also, without completely removing the file, you can use the break system packages switch to install packages via pip without raising the exception. But yeah, I specifically didn't play with containers in terms of demos, but the official Docker Python images are based on Debian. It might be fun to play with one of those to try to reproduce all of these examples if you wanted to be absolutely certain of what happens. Of course, further reading as far as where to find any of this information here. And let's, if anyone has questions, I'll take those now, and then I'm going to give Carl a chance to come up here and talk about the Raspberry Pi that I just beat up for the purposes of the demo.
Is there any way to install specific hotfix versions of Python? Like you can install Python x.y. What about x.y.z? I've never been able to find that.
I don't think I've ever seen that packaged for Debian. I think it's you get the major and minor, but not patch.
I think normally if they do the latest patch. So if it's like major, minor, and then whatever the latest is.
Yes, like
it
I,
should be.
something that I end up doing, I use the official Python Docker images because the patch versions sometimes make really weird breaking changes, actually.
Mm.
So if you can't pin that, like you can't guarantee reproducibility in production. So creates a weird problem that I basically avoided by just whatever the official Python image says. But
Yeah, I mean, this is ultimately, it's like, okay, so there's Python here, but who's it for? It's like the packaged version has to be tested against all of the system software, whereas, yeah, you're developing a project and you have greater control, but you have more specific needs.
Does Debian have any thought on whether or not to, when running Python inside of a Debian-based virtual environment or Debian-based Docker container, whether or not you need to create that inside of a virtual environment or use the system-level Python version that's packaged with their Debian OS?
Well, if you, okay, so as far as whether or not to run Python in a virtual environment in a Docker container, if the container was built with the externally managed flag in place, if you don't use a virtual environment, it's going to raise an exception when you try to pip install packages. So there's that, but it's also a container, it's specific use, and you could turn that flag off.
Debian has that flag on by default with their base images, maybe?
I didn't really actually look at that. I haven't encountered it with, so this was something new as of Debian 11. And I haven't encountered it when building images, but I think I've mostly worked with PyEnv, so there's some weird. It's not the system Python anyway. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Carl.
one last question. So one of the options it gave for instructions was like apt install pip x.y dash the package name. So does Debian vendor a subset or all Python packages? And if so, how does it guarantee security?
Okay, you were talking about the error message.
Yeah, the first error message you showed, one option it gave you in the list of options was like apt install python x.y dash Python package name.
I kind of assumed you'd be responsible for breaking that file. But I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Because if they go and vendor that and they're not validating security, I'm not sure what they're really helping you with, other than it's not your global. No, it'll still be your global environment. I don't know what they're helping you with.
Debian, everything they guarantee security updates. Do like apt, they have like a security repo. And so they'll push security updates to anything if it's packaged. Ubuntu does like the universe where they dump like 90% of the stuff in the universe. And then they say, well, we're not responsible for any of that. But Debian won't do that. So, but I mean, it's a volunteer project, so it depends on, you know.
Okay, so what this was, okay, so this was, it said to install Python packages system-wide, try to apt install Python 3-XYZ with XYZ being whatever package name. And if you wish to install a non-Debian packaged Python package, create a virtual environment. And
That's just values and
Whatever package, like
yeah.
maybe Django, Python-Django.
then yeah, it begs the question of how many are vendors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then well, so I think most of the Python packages that are out there are made available through Debian. But yeah, then they further have this recommendation to use pipx to install your package. But yeah. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Carl.